everyone, Pam Gregory. I'm going to be speaking to you today about the first half of July and the solar eclipse that we have coming up in Cancer on the 12th or 13th, depending on where in the world you live. Now, we're entering a very intense period. I say that because this time around, we have 3 eclipses over the next 2 months as opposed to the normal 2. But we also have this continuing square between Mars and Uranus, which I'll be talking more about. And that square is going to run until the 1st of October. So definitely we're going to feel the effects for the next 3 months. So it's the beginning of a period of intensity, certainly for this summer, if you live in the Northern Hemisphere, but also, for reasons I'll come to later in the video, it's also the beginning of a very, very important period running all the way up to 2020, which is our next big astrological year that we're focusing on. So, Mars-Uranus squares. I mentioned in the last video, this can be very volatile and eruptive behaviour. It can be angry spats, temper tantrums, tempers flaring, it can be irritability, feeling that you're being criticised. It can be going in too quickly because both Mars and Uranus are to do with speeding up. We can act too quickly, we can speak too quickly in an aggressive way, or we can cut off. Uranus, we can just cut off from people. And for all of us, it could affect our friendships. It could change our friendships, particularly if Aquarius, Mars is moving through the early degrees of Aquarius, falls in your 3rd or your 11th houses of your chart. Those are the houses of friendship. And by the way, if you don't know where that falls in your chart, please check out this link above. You can download a free birth chart from my website, get those videos, and that will answer the "what does it mean for me" question and help you enormously with what I'm going to be talking about in this update and any update I ever do. So, volatile energy. It could be a really hot, temperamental summer over the next 3 months. So being aware of that, please, please step back. If you don't want to cut off from friendships, if you don't want to get into angry situations or be the recipient of angry situations, always step back, because with all the twists and turns we're going to be seeing in outer events, because Mars is retrograde from 26th of June to the 27th of August, it's going to be crisscrossing and reforming that square to Uranus over the next 3 months. So that is why we could see this kind of volatility continuing for that period of time. But equally, it can cause twists and turns and zigzagging in outer events and in your own life too. But we can be very aware of what we're seeing in the world. And so always have that feeling of stepping back first. Stepping back, being mindful, observing the situation, and what would your best self, what would your higher self do in that situation if you don't want to rupture friendships in that way. Be very careful on social media. Aquarius is the sign most linked to social media, and there's certainly been a quite well-known US presenter who may have done better to step back before she put angry things out on social media. So just give yourself space, give yourself breathing space to act in your own best interest and the interests of those people around you. But the outer events, as I say, could appear chaotic over the next 3 months. Of which way are we going? Is it this way or that way? So, as I always say, try and find the centre within yourself, because it will be so easy to be buffeted by what's going on in the world or in your own community even. So find that sense of anchor, of compass, and whether you do that by breath work, candle gazing, meditation, listening to beautiful music, Tibetan bells, whatever, painting, writing, sitting by water, being in nature, whatever works best for you to create that altered state. try and make that your default position, that your centre is that rather than your centre being out in the world, because it's so important. And what will help us a lot, and certainly in the first 10 days or so of July, is we have a beautiful grand water trine between, these are all happening at the mid degrees of the signs of Sun, mid degrees of Cancer, Jupiter mid degrees of Scorpio, Neptune mid degrees of Pisces, and they form an equilateral triangle, which is this very subtle, beautiful yin feminine energy that helps us to connect to a sense of peace, a sense of calm, a sense of oneness to all sentient beings, a sense of oneness and connection to source. It can give us inspiration for bigger dreams in our lives, but tune into that as your divine guidance, as your quiet whisper of divine guidance, rather than the yang events happening in the world. And then on the 10th of the month, Jupiter goes direct. Jupiter's been retrograde, it goes direct at 13 of Scorpio. See where 13 of Scorpio falls in your chart, which house, which area of life it's in, because once it's going direct, that can give you more hope and vision in that area of life. And from the 10th onwards, particularly with Jupiter being direct, it can bring in a sense of success or abundance or recognition for you into that area of life, helped by that grand trine in water as well. But now turning to the more yang energy that we're going to be experiencing in July. Mars is incredibly strong at this time. As I say, it's moving through the early degrees of Aquarius. It's retrograde, so it's backing up from 9 degrees of Aquarius back to 2 degrees of Aquarius by the end of the month, squaring Uranus in Taurus at 2 degrees. It's 2 degrees all month, Uranus in Taurus. So if you have anything particularly between about 0 to 3 degrees, 0 to 4 degrees of the fixed signs, they are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, you will really feel this quite strongly, this kind of irritability or even frustration bubbling up. So be very aware and observe. Step back when you feel that. Now, Mars is stronger also because it's retrograde, and when planets are retrograde, they are closer to the Earth, and that increases the intensity of the symbolism. So Mars, by the end of July, is going to be at around 35 million miles from Earth, I understand, as opposed to the average of 140 million miles. So it's going to be significantly closer, and that can expand or intensify the nature of Mars energy. And Mars, as you all, I'm sure, will know, is about assertion or aggression or attack or being very willful in what you want. It's also very strong because from the 7th of July to the 24th of September, Mars goes what is called out of bounds. And when a planet goes out of bounds, it means it goes beyond the normal 23 degrees of declination, now north or south, that the Earth's orbit makes around the Sun. So when a planet goes beyond that, again, the symbolism is increased. And it can be almost a kind of out of control feeling around that symbolism. So as well as having these eclipses through the next 2 months, Mars is going to be exceptionally strong through the next 3 months. And that will again intensify this, this square with Uranus. You may have a sense, see where both Mars and Uranus are falling in your chart. Early Aquarius for Mars, early Taurus for Uranus, because there is going to be a sense of I don't want any constraint. I don't want anybody to tell me what to do, to push me around, to hold me down. I want to be free. And particularly where Uranus is moving through your chart, it'll move very slowly over the next 7-8 years through Taurus. That is an area where you're going to want more freedom. Just want to do my own thing, no interference. So these energies are strong. They're eruptive, as I say, they're eruptive in behaviour. They're eruptive for the Earth, which I believe that the Earth just simply reflects our collective consciousness. So we've seen Hawaii volcano, which is ongoing still, Guatemala, the recent earthquake also in Osaka in Japan, and there may be more to come because volcanoes and earthquakes tend to be more common when planets like Mars and Uranus with all this tension are in fixed signs, immovable fixed signs. Because something's kind of got to give with all of that tension and that fixity. Now, very positively, this aspect can be wonderful for innovation technologically, innovation with aviation. I mentioned recently there's a great concept called the plane train, which is a combination of both, which is a train that flies above the ground. And that is a perfect expression. It's in development at the moment, a perfect expression of Mars-Uranus, because both Uranus and Aquarius are very connected to aviation as well as innovation. So, but also Mars in Aquarius is really wonderful for redefining yourself, redefining who you are in your social context. As I say, friendships are very likely to change for many people, particularly if you have any early planets in the fixed signs. You may feel that urge more strongly. But it gives, Mars in Aquarius gives the urge to redefine yourself and upgrade yourself, because Uranus and Aquarius are both connected to the superconscious, getting downloads of information, getting insights, flashes, which can help you see things from a higher perspective. And particularly around the 2 eclipses that we're going to have in July, that may be a particularly strong time for that to happen for you. So Mars, in addition, is very strong because it is also conjunct the transiting South Node. It also happens coincidentally to be conjunct the South Node in the US chart. I mentioned this last time. I'll be talking even more about this in the next video because that aspect becomes very prominent at the second eclipse in the month. But it really brings home the message of Mars is the old way of doing things. And I think July and the next 3 months, in fact, may make it very obvious that anger can be hollow. Anger doesn't, an assertion and attack don't necessarily get us to where we want to be as a society. It's the old patriarchy, the old masculine, the old ways of doing things. Now, as I said, I'll talk more about that in the next video, but Mars super strong over the next 3 months. So we are moving also, and I'd like to be really aware of this personally, from Leo Aquarius eclipses into Cancer and Capricorn. Now, eclipses happen in opposite signs, pairs of signs, for about 18 months. So our Leo Aquarius pairing began in February 2017. We're actually going to have our last Leo eclipse in August. But we already, in this first half of July, are starting to move into Cancer Capricorn. Now, what I'd like you to do is look at where Leo and Aquarius fall in your chart, which houses they are in, and what that has meant for you over the last 18 months. Because normally where the eclipses fall are areas of activity and change for you, particularly if it is where your natal nodal axis falls in your chart as well, the same houses. For me, they fall in 3rd and 9th, and that's been in many, many ways enormous over the last 18 months. So the eclipses always move backwards through the signs because eclipses have to happen close to the transiting nodal axis. So they're now moving into Cancer and Capricorn. So start at this very first Cancer eclipse to start to see the theme, because there's always a kind of 18-month theme of what it means for you personally in your life. So see the houses where these are going to fall. The other reason this is so important is this is the first eclipse in Cancer, but the Cancer Capricorn eclipses are going to run all the way up until, again, 2020, our next important astrological year. It's important because there's a very powerful eclipse between Saturn and Pluto that doesn't happen very often. That's in January of 2020. And that is really about restructuring governments and restructuring societies, because ultimately I believe we are going to move away from a vertical structure of society to a much more horizontal structure where there's a sense of equality and mutual respect. And that will really start to happen at the end of 2020 with the important conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn at 0 of Aquarius, but much more of that in videos to come. But the other reason this solar eclipse is so important is that conjunction, Saturn and Pluto in January 2020, is happening at 22 of Capricorn. This solar eclipse, and I'll talk about exactly what's happening in a moment, is happening at 20 degrees 41 of Cancer, so virtually 21 of Cancer. So it is almost exactly opposing that big conjunction in January 2020. And so we may see some glimpses of a theme for the world as well as a theme for yourself happening at this solar eclipse. So it's at 20 degrees of Cancer, 41 minutes. This happens on the 12th of July at 7:47 p.m. Pacific, and it happens on the 13th of July at 3:47 a.m. UK time. Now this is also a supermoon. We have a lot of intensity, as I said. This is a supermoon, which means that the moon is very close in its orbit to the Earth. So not only is Mars very close, exceptionally close to the Earth in its orbit, so is the moon. And that heightens emotion, particularly when the eclipse is in a sensitive water sign like Cancer. And the moon is also the ruler of Cancer. So again, greater intensity around emotion. Also, it's a north node eclipse. So that means an eclipse has to happen when the moon is either at the north node end or the south node end of the transiting nodal axis. So north node is our collective future destiny. So this is a very forward-looking, supercharged new moon, if you like, because a solar eclipse is always a big new beginning. See where 20 of Cancer falls in your chart. And this is an exceptionally good time. I mean, a new moon is always a great time to set a new intention, but particularly because it's a supermoon, particularly because it's a north node eclipse, a great time to set an intention, a new intention for yourself. And that intention should be conditioned by the house area, the life area in which it falls for you in your chart. If you don't know, again, check out the link. But also perhaps you could set a new intention for the Earth, for the world that you would like to see. So eclipses can be wild cards. They can jump us forwards in our destiny. They can bring out opportunities from nowhere, benefactors to support us. Things can happen that really jump us forward in our path. So see where that falls, because that could be a very exciting period for you. And solar eclipses have an orb of time of a month, up to a month before and up to 6 months after in their effect. But the closer to the exact date, the more likely you are to see a manifestation. So do watch that. Do watch that very closely. Now the other reason this is powerful is the Sun and Moon, 20 of Cancer, are exactly being opposed by Pluto at 20 of Capricorn. Cancer is a sign of deep emotion, sensitivity, and vulnerability. It's also the sign of motherhood and nurturing, and therefore it brings children into the picture. Vulnerability, sensitivity around children, or the vulnerability of children. Versus Pluto in Capricorn tends to be the power of the state, the power of the government, the power of strong institutions. And I think there is one very big and clear example that we're seeing in the world where we are already, even before we get to this exact eclipse, solar eclipse, we are feeling that incredibly strongly. But think about your own situation. Do you have a feeling of victimhood? That's often very linked to Cancer, or powerlessness. And that can only happen really in your personal life, where you've given your power away to someone else. If we have this strong sense of centre, we don't give our power away. We operate in much more equal, respectful relationships generally. So the other theme this can bring up is your work-home balance. because Capricorn is to do with work and Cancer is to do with your home life, your personal life. Is that in the right balance? Or do you need to make some adjustments there? Cancer is very connected to our emotional security and where and how we feel that. Capricorn is connected to our practical security. So for me, this also talks about a connection back to the earth, actually. And the reason I say that is not only do we have a grand water trine at the beginning of the month, but for the first 10 days, we also, at the time of the solar eclipse, have a grand earth trine, an equilateral triangle between Saturn in Capricorn, Uranus in early Taurus, and Venus and Ceres, the asteroid connected to Mother Earth and the harvest, in early Virgo. So that's the equilateral triangle. And this, for me, is really reminding us to connect back to the earth. Yes, if we're lucky, we may have a home of an apartment or even a house with bricks and mortar, but ultimately our home is planet Earth. And perhaps this reminds us to take much greater care of planet Earth. We are becoming more awakened to the plight of the earth, but also that simple act, which I've talked about before, putting bare feet on the earth, bare feet on the grass, and sucking up the negative ions from the earth, which are incredibly healing for us and have really enormous physiological effects, very positive ones, on our system and our biomarkers. If you don't know about earthing, if you don't know about this, go to groundology.com. And that has a great deal of free information on what simply putting your feet on the ground, on the earth, does for your entire physical body. And I think in modern life, particularly if we live in cities, we can become so disconnected from being a part of nature, that the earth is our home. And I think moving through the next few years, the more we can do that, the more we can really have that sense of connection to the earth as our home, the better we will be for living through a lot of the intensity we're going to see in the next few years. So a lot to talk about in the next video as well, but enjoy this wonderful solar eclipse coming up in Cancer. Remember, it's a new beginning for you. Set a new intention, and for the earth, for the world. If you'd like more information about my books, my tutorial videos, my monthly newsletter, which is growing like topsy, it's almost 7,000 words for the July newsletter, just sign up on my website. They come out at the end of each month, be aware of that, and we'd love to have you along, because I can go into much more detail about subjects I touch on here, but much more detail about subjects that I don't really mention at all in the videos. There isn't time, so other things that I may want to share. So thank you so much for listening, and have a wonderful solar eclipse in Cancer on the 12th and 13th of the month. Bye for now.